We are, as we said, wrapping up the series that we've been in over the last couple of weeks called Base Camp. And throughout this series, we've been looking at some of the things that we can do, some of the practices that we can put in place in our life to help energize or vitalize or revitalize our faith and our walk with our relationship with Jesus. And as we wrap up this weekend, we're going to get to that in a second, but as I was thinking about the message and working on the message this week, it reminded me of being in ninth grade. In ninth grade, I'll never forget, I was sitting in a biology class, which is everyone's favorite subject. We had a biology teacher here first hour who made sure that she knew that it should be everyone's favorite subject. Wasn't my favorite subject, and so like any good student, I sat in the absolute back row of the entire class, because other people needed to sit closer to be able to learn and all. I didn't need to worry about that. And I remember as I was sitting in the back row of the class, one day the teacher got up and she started to present and write on the board, and for the first time in my life, I recognized I couldn't see what she was writing. Like I knew she was putting something on the board, but I couldn't make out what she was writing on the board. And in that moment, there were really two thoughts that quickly flashed through my mind. The first was, I'm going blind. That was the first thing in my mind. I don't know what's going on. I can't see. I'm losing my sight. I'm going blind. The second thought was, I will never be a naval aviator. I know that's weird. I've always wanted to be a naval aviator. My favorite movie growing up was Top Gun. When Maverick came out, I'm all about that movie. Here's just a little pro tip. Every time I'm on a flight right now, I don't know, every time I'm on an Alaska flight, they have Maverick available to watch. Watch that movie on a plane, because guaranteed, every flight, at some point, the plane is going to turn at the precise time where Maverick banks, and you just feel really cool in that moment. Again, pro tip, you'll appreciate it. Download it, buy it, whatever, or watch it on Alaska. But anyway, so I wanted to be a naval aviator. You have to have perfect vision to be able to fly those planes. And so right away, I was like, my world is caving in. I went home and I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm either turning blind or I don't know what's going on, and I'm never going to be able to become a fighter pilot. And quickly, they sort of calmed me down. They took me to see an eye doctor. I went through a series of tests. If you've ever been there, they're like, 1, 2, 2, 1, 3, 2. I'm like, the first test I do, you push a button and it zooms in and gives me perfect vision. Why do we have to do this? This is just silly. I'm sure, if you're an optometrist, you can tell me why later. But I went through all the numbers, the crazy, they blow air in your eye, the worst. Turns out, not going blind. I just suffer from nearsightedness, which I think most of us know, but if you don't, I can see right in front of me, but I can't see far away. And it's sort of been my reality. Since ninth grade on, I've wore glasses or contacts, something to help me see. Many of you are in the same boat where you've had contacts or glasses in your whole life, and maybe you're nearsighted or farsighted, but we have these things that change how we can see. Now, even though I've lived with it my entire life, my kids still like to make fun of me about the whole thing, because I've raised really sensitive, empathetic kids. So often, my kids will be like, Dad, take off your glasses. And I'll take off my glasses, and they'll stand 10 to 15 feet away from me. And they're like, how many fingers am I holding up? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just guessing. 73. Every once in a while, if they hold it in front of them, I'm toast. I can't see. If they hold it out to the side, there's some differentiation that I can kind of usually guess. But basically, here's the story. I'm blind. That's I can't see well without my glasses off. Now, when I take my glasses off, though, I can see really well what's right in front of me. Let me say this a different way. I'm really good at noticing everything that's going on with myself. I can see all of myself, but I can't see other people. I can't see what's going on 5, 10 feet in front of me. And I share that story because I think the truth is the same is a reality for a lot of us. For a lot of us, we're really good at focusing on ourselves. We're really good seeing ourselves. Even as a church, we can be really good at being focused on ourselves. We start to think about, what are the things that impact me? What are the things that I care about? Right? Because I'm nearsighted. I'm just focused on myself. And so, I want them to sing the songs that I want them to sing at church. I want the pastor to preach the messages. I want him to preach at church. I'd really like him to preach a little bit shorter when I'm at church. I want the kids ministry to make sure they raise up my kids like I want them to be raised. We have this tendency to be very nearsighted in our approach to life. We want everything our way. We want it to fit our desires, our wants, our needs. And so to talk about, this is what we're going to talk about today, how do we go from being people who are nearsighted to people who can see beyond ourselves? And one of the biggest hurdles to that is to be able to truly assess where you're at. Are you someone who is so focused on themselves that they miss everybody else? Or are you appropriately focused on yourself, mindful of everybody else, but still can recognize what's going on? Are you just completely self-effacing and all you think about is other people? Where are we at? And sometimes we are our harshest critics, but at times we are the most blind to how we actually operate, think, and walk out our life in our faith. So here is a great way for us just to kind of get on the same page and assess, are we too focused on ourselves? And so here's sort of the thing that I would say, the litmus test, if you will, is this. If God answered all your prayers, like every prayer that you had, if God answered your prayers, would it change the world or just you? I want you to think about it for a second. Think about the things that you pray, the things that you ask God to do. If God just said yes, if God answered every single prayer that you have, would it change the world or would it just change you? And if the truth is it would just change you, your circumstances, your experience, then you are nearsighted. That you're just focused on yourself. And it might be easy to say, well, this is just Pastor Mike's soapbox issue. He's always talking about it. It's a big deal for him. Mike wants us to be focused on other people, not ourselves, to be on mission to other people, not just focused on ourselves and our relationship with God. It's just Pastor Mike's thing. But the problem is, it's actually Jesus' thing. I mean, look at what Jesus says. He says these words in Matthew 28, beginning in verse 19. He says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." The literal translation there, to go, is this idea of as you go. And so as you go and leave church today, make disciples. As you walk into the supermarket, make disciples. As you walk into your workplace, make disciples. As you go about your life, wherever God takes you, the call is to make disciples, to live lives beyond just ourselves, to be focused on other people and helping them take steps towards Jesus. This is what the Great Commission is all about. And notice it's not like the great suggestion, the great, hey, if you want to. This is what we have been commanded as Christ followers to do. I've mentioned that we are concluding this series we've been in Base Camp, and over these last 5 weeks, we've talked about these different practices. The first practice that we talked about was to gather purposefully. We said, look, there's an intentionality to why we gather together. As Christians, when we gather, there's power in the gathering, that God is present with us as we gather, and so there's a purpose to it. And that we need to be here because we are here for each other, but we're also here collectively to worship God. In week 2, we talked about the importance of connecting deeply. That God has made us to be relational in nature, that we are meant to be in relationship first and foremost with God, but we're meant to also be in relationship with other people. Because when we are in those relationships, we are fully known and we can be grown. The third week, we talked about this idea of serving selflessly. That we're called to live lives beyond ourselves, make a difference in other people's lives, serve other people, serve on behalf of Jesus. Last week, we talked about the importance of giving generously. That we recognize as followers of Christ that everything that we've been given is been given by God, and we're asked to trust God by giving back a percentage of what we have, a tithe, a tenth, to God, to move forward His ministry, His work, but also to make sure our heart is in the proper place. And one of the things I asked, I said, I want everyone to take a step in their faith journey through this and through this idea of generosity. And one of the ways that you could do that is through the buying of merchandise. Every year, we have summer camps, and summer camps for elementary age kids all the way up through high school. And one of the things that we do with that is when we get the price of the camps, it's pretty astronomical. And even when you get the price that you see, most of you parents are like, wow, this is pretty expensive. But there's a gap between what it actually costs and what parents have to pay that gets bought down because of the generosity of people in our church. And so when people buy things like merchandise, like a hoodie or a sweatshirt or a hat or a sticker, all the proceeds to that go to help make it possible for kids to go to camp this summer. And so we talked about it last week, but for the next 2 weeks, this week and next week, we're going to be selling the merchandise. And so if you weren't here or if you didn't, one of the ways that you can begin to practice generosity is when the service is over. Go buy a sticker. Go buy a hat. Go buy a shirt. You get something out of it, but you're also making an impact. You're making a difference in the life of some kid you might not even know who might meet Jesus for the first time this summer. And today, as we wrap it all up, we're going to talk about the last practice, which is to influence daily. And so this is like, how do we use our lives? How do we leverage the relationships that we have each and every day to influence people to take steps of faith, to take steps closer to Jesus? And no one was better at this than the early church. Like when you look at the pages of the book of Acts, which we'll be in today, which is sort of the birth and the expansion of the early church, like you see that this is a group of people that fully understood what it meant to influence daily. And there's one story that we're going to look at in particular that's found in Acts chapter 17. And here we see the Apostle Paul, who is a significant leader in the early church. He is in the ancient city of Athens. And some of you might be familiar with Athens. Some of the great thinkers in history have come from Athens. People like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. Like it was known in its heyday as the pinnacle or the center of intellect in the ancient world. But when we join with the story here in Acts 17, it's some like 400 years after Athens was at its pinnacle. And a lot has changed in the city of Athens, but yet still it's held as sort of this intellectual hub of the world. And this is where we'll join with the story in Acts 17, beginning in verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them, and them is some of his companions to show up in Athens for them to do the work that they had marked out for them. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. Okay, so at this point in time, again, some 400 years after the pinnacle of Athens, there is approximately 10,000 people that are living in the city. At the same time, there are some 30,000 statues, 30,000 monuments to idol gods. The joke was, in Athens, it was easier to run into a god than it was actually to run into a person. And so this is the context that Paul is stepping into. Paul is there to share about Jesus, to share about Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. He's there to let the people of Athens know who the true God is. And so we read this in verse 17. So he, being Paul, reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. Now, whenever Paul came to a new city, the first thing that he would do is he would go to the synagogues. And he would go to the synagogue and he would share about Jesus, and he would invite the Jewish people or the God-fearing Greeks to accept the message about Jesus. But after that, he would then go into the marketplace. He would go into the town square, and he would take that same message and to share it with this group of people about who Jesus was. Now, Athens was a little bit different than a lot of ancient cities when it came to the town square. In Athens, there was a speaker podium. Like built into the square was a place for people of intellect to stand up on and to begin to pontificate to the people in the community about something. And so sure enough, when Paul shows up, he gets on the speaker podium and begins to talk about Jesus. In the second half of verse 18, we read this: a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began debating him. Again, so I want you to kind of visualize this in your mind. Paul walks into this large town square. He sees this speaker podium. It's unique to Athens. Paul steps up on the podium. He begins to speak about Jesus. And we're told that there are Epicurean and Stoic philosophers there to debate him. Now, depending how long ago your philosophy classes were or how much you actually care about philosophy, you might not have any idea what Epicurean and Stoic philosophers are. So let me just quickly summarize it. Epicurean philosophers believed in the principle of eat, drink, and be merry. The most important thing in life was to satisfy the pleasures of your life. In that way, honestly, it's kind of how our world operates today. Hey, just be nearsighted. Just focus on you, satisfy your desires, whatever you want, whatever you need, chase after that. Your pursuit, your desires are the most important things. Okay, that's kind of what the Epicureans believe. The Stoics believe something different. The Stoics believe, man, there's nothing worse than to have loved and to have that love lost, that you feel the heartbreak of it. And so to prevent yourself from experiencing heartbreak, to live a pleasure-filled life, then you would actually hold back everything from your experience. That it was to desire nothing, to want nothing, to love nothing, to pursue nothing. Because if you didn't do that, then you couldn't be hurt. And so these vastly different groups of people, they begin to debate Paul, and they do so on the basis of philosophy and religion. And we see this sort of play out, second half of verse 18. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Now, it seems like, based off the text, that this idea of foreign gods is a big deal. Paul's preaching about these foreign gods. Again, on our end, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. There's 30,000 gods. Does it really matter if there's now 30,001? From their perspective, why is this a big deal? Let me tell you why it's a big deal. Because in Athens, they thought it was perfectly fine. It was actually desired that there would be debate on important issues. They didn't care if you debated on issues. They just had to be approved. If it was an approved idea, then by all means, go back and forth. You can debate all you want. But if the idea wasn't approved, then you weren't allowed to talk about it. And that's really what the issue at hand is here. Paul, your ideas have not been approved. That you're talking about Jesus and his resurrection, we've not approved that. And so here's what they do. Verse 19, so they took him, being Paul, and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus. It's a hard word. I knew I was going to mess it up this morning. Where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting." And so they take Paul from the public square, probably take him down off the speaker's podium. They take him to the Areopagus, which is literally where the city council meeting happens. And they say, "Paul, we've brought you here. We brought you before the city council. We want you to present your ideas to the council, and so they can decide if this is an approved idea or not." Now, at this moment, this is about 20 years after the resurrection of Jesus. And so word has kind of gotten out. People are aware of it. But here is someone who seems to know a lot about the resurrection of Jesus. And so the whole city council turns out. Everyone comes to hear from Paul. Because again, they prided themselves to be open to new ideas. They wanted to hear about this risen Messiah and make the distinction, is this an approved idea or not? And then Paul says this in verse 22. Then Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and I looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. Paul's like, I walked your city. I've seen these altars. I've seen the statues to all of these gods. 30,000 gods. You guys even have a statue to an unknown God. Like, just in case you missed one. I want to make sure all your bases are covered so that, if God shows up and you don't have a statue, we're like, oh, no, we do. You're the unknown God. We were prepared for you. Like, it's just crazy. Like, Paul even calls it out. He's like, you guys are this is insane. But let me tell you who the true God is. I think we can look at this story. We can look at the story of the people of Athens and we can think, man, they've got it all twisted. Like, it's all messed up. But the truth is, we're similar in a lot of ways. Like, we don't have statues of idols. But a lot of us, we have idols in our life. Our family, maybe, our kids, our careers, our hobbies, our toys. But we come to church, just in case, make sure all of our bases are covered. We do the church thing, or we come on Easter and Christmas, and then go about and just kind of live our lives, but all of our bases are covered. In many ways, we're not all that different from the people of Athens. Now, what Paul does next, I think is just amazing. Paul begins to use their culture. He begins to use their literature as a launching point to begin to talk with these people of Athens about Jesus. Paul makes a decision that he's going to meet the people where they are at and then help them take steps towards Jesus, which is different than what a lot of us do. What a lot of us do, we want people to meet us where we're at. Like, when people can meet us where we're at, then we're comfortable to helping them take steps of faith. But to actually go to people, to meet difficult people, to meet with broken people, to meet with people who think things very differently than we think, that's hard for us. But it's exactly what we see Paul do. He meets people where they're at and he helps them take a step. He finds common ground to start a conversation and to build a relationship with the desire to help people take steps towards Jesus. Now, you see Paul do this all throughout the New Testament. And one of the other things you see, not only does he meet people where they're at, he shares his faith with those people, but one of the other things that you see is it's not always welcomed. And I think if you've ever shared your faith with someone, you can probably relate to that. Like, it's not always been welcomed. I'm sure you've had someone in your life that you've walked up to. This has probably never happened. You walk up to someone in your life and you're like, hey, can I tell you about Jesus? And they're like, man, more than anything, that's what I would love to hear. And so you tell them about Jesus, like, wow, like that's the greatest news ever. Like, that's what I want. That's what I needed to know. Like, most of us probably haven't experienced that in our lives. Sharing our faith can be awkward. It can be overwhelming. It's not always met with just open hearts or ears. But here's what I want you to understand. What's true for us is true for Paul. That Paul, his message, it wasn't always warmly welcomed. Look at what we read. Continuing the story. Verse 32. When they, the city council, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them, what? Sneered. Some of them laughed. Some of them probably started mocking him. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. Some made fun of Paul. But for some, the door was opened. For some people, there was a desire to lean in, a desire to hear more, a desire to take a step of faith. And what we know is because of Paul, many of those people became followers of Jesus. And all of this happened because Paul was willing to open his eyes and to see other people. Paul wanted to see beyond himself. He wanted to see the needs of other people. He wanted to see where they were at. And so here's the question I have for you. Do you have your eyes open to the people around you? Is that even a priority for you? Like, are you content to just experience life being nearsighted, focused on yourself, needs of yourself? Or are you willing to see beyond yourselves, to see the needs of the people around you? And my guess is probably not. I mean, I don't know that personally, but what I'll tell you is the statistics overwhelmingly say the vast majority of Christians, they don't look beyond themselves. Is that where you're at? Are you just focused on yourself? Again, back to the first question, if God answered every prayer, would it just change your world or the world? Are you committed to seeing your life as an opportunity to influence the life of other people each and every day? Almost a year ago, like almost to the day, we did a series called 4. And in that series, one of the things that we did is we challenged the people of the church to identify 4 people in their lives who are far from God, who they're saying, I will take personal ownership in helping these people take steps of faith to grow closer and closer to Jesus. And what we asked the people of our church to do is to identify it. I mean, part of the reason why we struggle to share our faith is because most of us don't even know what the target is. Right? Like it's been said, if you don't know where you're aiming, you're going to miss the target every time. And so what we said is a year ago, we're going to name our 4 people, and we're going to go after our 4 people because these are the people we believe God has put in our lives for us to help them take a step of faith. And I know when I say that, some of you are thinking, oh, I forgot about that. Like, oh, I remember that we did that. I remember that I named my 4 people. Who are my 4 people? Don't worry, you're not alone. This past week, we had a staff meeting, and I went to the staff, and I said, hey, who can name their 4 people? And I won't tell you who, but not every staff member got all of them right. So you're not alone. But some of us, like, yeah, we did that. We named our people, but then we just kind of forgot about it. Life got busy. Things moved on. Maybe you weren't here a year ago, and you never took the time to name your 4. We want to give you the opportunity to do that. Because, again, knowing what your target is so important. And so if you have not named your 4, if you want to name your 4, you can go to lakesawyerchurch.org/your4, and if you forget it, it's in the program. You just access the program, you can access that page, and take a second to declare who your 4 are. And as a staff, we'll pray for you in those 4 relationships that God has put in your life for you to help them find and follow Jesus. Now, at the same time, if you're like some of us who just forgot, who've been busy, whose life's moved on, and you can't even remember who your 4 are or even what you're supposed to do with them, on that page as well, there are resources for you. So what does it look like to invest in that relationship? What are some things that you can do to help move that relationship forward, to help your people take steps? Like just because it fell off your plate doesn't mean it's not time to pick it back up, because at some point you believed that God put those people in your life for a reason. And so we want to help you, help them take steps of faith. Now, I've already said this, but sharing your faith is scary. There's a lot of fear for people when it comes to sharing their faith. One of the things that often gets asked is like, well, what if they ask me a question and I don't know the answer? And I totally get it. I can't tell you how often people come up to me, like, Pastor Mike, I was like, I couldn't remember, like, I was like reading the Bible a while back, and like, there's like this like verse about like God, and like, he's powerful, and like, he changes things in people's life. What verse is that? I'm like, I don't know. Like, first off, you gave me very little information. Secondly, like, I don't know what you think I do all week, but Monday through Saturday, I don't just memorize the Bible. I mean, it'd be pretty cool if I could, but it's not how I'm wired. Like, I don't know, I don't have all the answers. I found myself in that same position, sharing my faith. Like, I don't know, that's a great question. I don't have the answer. Let me go find out the answer, and let me get back to you. See, not having an answer is not a great excuse. You know what it is? It's just an excuse. It's something that we say often to cover up the fact that we really don't want to share our faith, that we're really not comfortable with it. Because if we believed in a God who could orchestrate everything in this world, a God who could redeem us and offer us new life, then we have to believe that same God would give us the power as we step out to share our faith with other people. And if you don't believe that, then you believe in a very small, powerless God. There was a recent statistic that I read. I actually said this at the end of the last series, and I mentioned I was going to bring it up again in this series, so I'm hoping you all forgot. But the statistic that came out was 82% of non-Christians said that they would go to church if they were invited, which is a pretty cool number. Like 82% of people who don't follow Jesus said, look, if someone invited me to church, I'd go. Like I would go. Here's the problem with it. That same study found that only 2% of Christians actually invite their friends to church. That's a problem. 82% of people say, man, I would go if someone invited me. Only 2% of us are willing to influence someone each and every day of our lives. Only 2% of us are willing to extend an invitation. And if only 2% of us are actually willing to do what God has called us to do, what God has commanded us to do, then it's going to be hard for us to ever reach the world with the message of Jesus. I was reading this recently, but the population of the world today is about 8 billion people. That's crazy. I was old enough to remember when that number was in the sevens. Some of you are old enough to remember when the number was less. There's about 8 billion people in our world today. And by most accounts, of that 8 billion, roughly 2 billion people are followers of Jesus Christ. Which means on some level we have between 5.5 to 6 billion people in the world who need to hear and respond to the message of Jesus. And I say that, it's like, what does 6 billion people even look like, right? It's just like impossible to visualize. Like, well, 6 billion, it's a really big number. Like, what does that actually look like? So let me help us visualize that. If we were to take the 6 billion people who don't follow Jesus and ask them to stand in a line, one in front of the other. So you can kind of picture what this would look like. Like someone standing in front of me, and someone standing in front of them, and a person in front of them. If we lined up everyone who doesn't believe in Jesus, all 6 billion people, we would have a line that would start in Seattle and it would end in New York because there's water there. And then we'd have to build a bridge over the Atlantic Ocean into Africa. And that line of people would extend through Africa, it would extend through Asia, it would go all the way till it once again reaches the Pacific coast. And then we'd have to build a bridge from there back to Seattle, and those people would cross that bridge to get to where we are today. That would be one loop of people standing right in front of the other around the whole world. 6 billion people isn't just one loop around, or 2 loops around, or 5 loops around, or 10 loops around, or 20 loops around, or 40 loops around. It's 124 loops around the world. That's what 6 billion people look like. And again, I say that and you're like, Mike, how do we ever do that? How do we ever reach people? That many people. Well, when only 2% of us are doing the work, we're not. It's not going to happen. But listen to this. If 2 billion followers of Jesus make it their mission to reach one person in their lifetime, how many Christians are there? It's like simple math, guys. 2 billion people. reach 2 billion people. We have 4 billion people. And if those 4 billion followers of Jesus make it their mission to reach one person for Jesus, what do we have? We have 8 billion people. Suddenly, the impossible seems possible. And what seems possible quickly becomes probable because of our God, because of what He can do. But it takes you and me. It takes us living lives, once again, beyond ourselves. Lives that aren't focused on us, but lives that are committed to influence other people with the hope of Jesus each and every day. I'm inviting you on that journey. I'm inviting you to step into the call. I think maybe one of the reasons that we have sterile faith, one of the reasons why it just feels like we go through the motions when it comes to church and our relationship with God, is because we don't do one of the core things that Jesus has called His followers to do. So I'm asking you to step out, to step up, to make a difference, to join with the mission that God has given His church. And let's change the world together. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you so much. I thank you for the way that we see in Paul that he had a heart and eyes for other people. And God, I know that for so many of us, there are seasons of life where we can just get fixated and focused on ourselves and our wants and our needs. But God, you've called us to be about more. You've called us to be for other people, to help people find and follow Jesus. And so God, I pray that you would empower us to do that, to see the people in our lives, to invest in those relationships, and when the time is right, to help invite them to take a step towards you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.